please. Are your nostrils a quiver and tingling as well as a delicate lush and ambrosial smell?
Act 2 opens up with a roaring success, that they are making the most popular pies in London out of these people. Sweeney has a nagging doubt. Something doesn't quite ring true. He's not entirely happy, despite the fact he's prosperous, despite everything else. He still wants to go ahead. He still wants to get the people who destroyed his former life, his personality, if you like.
The problem with the opening of the second act was that I had to establish an awful lot of things at once. I had to establish the fact that the meat pie shop is now turned into a thriving business, and that there are gardens in the back with singing birds and terrible little potted palms, and that Mrs. Lovett is, you know, upwardly mobile, and she's got this, her new hostess gown on. And at the same time, Sweeney is in his barber shop awaiting the arrival of his brand new barber's chair. And they have to test out the chair. And she has to sell meat pies. And they have to run out of meat, so they have to get some more. And there are many things that have to happen in this number, and yet it had to be held together so that it wouldn't be just a series of disparate numbers. For one thing, if you'd had a number in the gardens and then a number about the chair, which is perfectly possible, it just wouldn't have been very inventive and would have been flat, and maybe it would have been fine. Maybe you could have written 2 smashing songs. But one of the problems with that is that a song that merely says her eating establishment is now thriving, and she has a lot of people, and she's feeding a lot of mouths and having a lot of pie, that's not enough for a song. That's enough for a verse of a song, but it doesn't move anywhere. Whereas if you mingle it with the action simultaneously of Sweeney's chair arriving, you not only have motion in the song and much more interest for the audience, but you also are able to make something for the actress playing Mrs. Lovett to play, which is that she doesn't know whether to keep the one eye on the till, which is, or she doesn't know how to keep one eye on the till, which is all the people eating the pies, and one eye on her lover colleague, Sweeney, and keep everybody happy. Because Sweeney wants her attention so he can have her help him test out the chair, and of course all the patrons want her attention so they can eat and drink, and she doesn't want to lose a penny. So what you have then is the servant of 2 masters, and you have a scene, or what they call in opera a scena. Well, that's, or a scena, I suppose, is the proper pronunciation. But the point is that you've got something interesting. On the other hand, it's a real problem. How do you hold that together without making it sound like what I call spaghetti, meaning it's just a hodgepodge? Well, one of the ways you do that is you plot out the action very carefully. I plotted out the scenario of what happens in that number within an inch of its life. I had plotted it for separate tables, and then Hal had this dazzling idea of having it all done at one table, which is just so extraordinary. But it still amounts to the same thing because she still addresses different patrons. But the idea was that she would be going from table to table, and then off on the other side of the stage, Sweeney would be whispering to her and saying, come here, come here, come here, and the chair is coming. Well, I plotted out each individual action, who she served pies to, how much ale she sold, which of the patrons got drunk, which didn't, which paid for their food and not, or not, because it always worked in the lyric, even though it goes by so fast that nobody in the audience may hear it. But the actress has something specific to play. She knows that she's got to treat that patron that way and that patron that way. She's got her assistant, Tobias, the kid, and he has to help her out. He has to carry things, and it was very carefully plotted who he would carry things to and where and when. And then her, of course, her stuff with Sweeney, and the use of all the stuff with the chair, of course, has to be plotted with an inch of its life, too, because that's a matter of timing, of testing out the chair and making the audience understand the way the chair works. Tobias is an apprentice to a seller of hair tonic in the first act, and he is taken over by Mrs. Lovett, and in the second act is selling meat pies. So, of course, the theme that he sang in the first act, which was called Pirelli's Miracle Elixir. Try Pirelli's Miracle Elixir, and it'll do the tricks. It's been a long time since I've done this, but at any rate, it rhymes with tricks, or quick to do the tricks, or something like that. Anyway, in the second act, it becomes, there you'll sample Mrs. Lovett's meat pies, savory and sweet pies, as you'll see.
You who eat pies, Mrs. Lovett's meat pies, and conjure up the sweet pies used to be.
That's Tobias's theme, and that's what he sells pies with. Now, when Mrs. Lovett makes her entrance and sings to the various people with equal insincerity, because she doesn't care about anybody, but she's being nice to everybody because she wants their money, she sings a variation on that instead of his theme. Sorry. She is singing, nice to see you, dearie, how have you been keeping? So, what she's singing is, nice to see you, dearie, how have you been keeping?
Call me Bunty, dearie, Toby, one for the gentleman, hear the birdies sing, help the pieces, dearie.
Toby, throw the old woman out. And the chorus comes in with their three-note motif. And those three notes then become developed later. All right, so we've got Toby's motif and Mrs. Lovett's motif. Now, when Todd gestures her to come over, what we have is Todd's motif utilized as in a different way. Remember, I told you earlier that one of his leitmotifs of the show, particularly when he is in a murderous mood, is this motif. Well, I took that and just divided it into the chords themselves, and then played it lightly so that when he's being conspiratorial with her, the music you get is, and he's going, excuse me, that's her to the customers. Excuse me, dear, see to the customers.
Yes, what last week, so the trade is rich.
And they start making their little conspiracy to that motif, which is, and then with the dum bum 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 ba da da da, that becomes important later. Then she goes back to her customers with her, what's your pleasure, dearie? And then the chorus starts. At that point, we start to develop the chorus a little bit too. Instead of just going, God, that's good, they go, God, that's good, that is delicious. Always slightly dissonant to show that they're not having quite as good, or they shouldn't be having quite as good a time as they are. And she goes on, she sells stuff, and what happens eventually is, of course, the chair arrives, and then we get, when they see the chair for the first time, Mrs. Lovett and Todd, they both admire it by going, ooh, ooh, which is, of course, the same thing. Todd's theme, slightly varied. Ooh, and out of that, ooh, comes the chair theme. Is that a chair fit for a king? Oh, wondrous, sweet, and most neat, and most particular chair, etc. So that what we get then is a lyrical theme. Wondrous, sweet, and most particular chair. It's sweet when it comes to the pies later. You tell me where the receipt can have compare with this particular, etc. I'm leaving out some of the notes because, as I say, I haven't played them a while. But that's the notion of it. And finally, of course, what happens is when everything is going on at once and Mrs. Lovett is being torn between both places, and it gradually builds, and they test the chair out and all that, eventually, at the climax, of course, the themes are all going on at the same time. And, for example, you've got Mrs. Lovett is singing, how about it, dearie, be here in the twinkling, and meanwhile, Tobias is going, is that a pie fit for a king, etc., etc., etc. So Tobias is taking the chair theme, which she has brought downstairs, and applying it to the pies instead of to the chair, etc., and she is going around, how about it, dearie, and Todd is upstairs fiddling around with the chair. And they go together and eventually climax with everybody singing on the God That's Good.